does have some parallels to what I want to talk about this morning, and so I'm going to give you, you might wind up with a spoiler or two if you haven't seen it. But it came out in '99, so you've had 20 years to watch it. Basically what happens is the main character, whose name is Neo, he's going through his life and he thinks there's more to the story, but he can't figure out what it is. And as he goes along, he meets some people and they start telling him what the piece he's missing is, what the rest of the story is. And what it turns out is that his reality is actually a computer program, and he's attached through his brain into this computer program. This is a sci-fi film, so. So his whole reality, his entire life, everything he knows is a computer program. It's not real life. And later on, he's taken out of that computer program, comes into his body, which has been in a kind of thing. So what's happening is the machines have started using human beings to power the machines. So they're basically batteries, and they're all hooked into this matrix in order to keep the humans from going crazy. So they think there's real things going on. They live their lives, and when they've reached their end, that's the end of it. And so once he's out of the matrix, this small group of people are trying to end this basically slave labor of the human race. So they're going back into the matrix to fight inside the matrix, but they're also coming out and fighting outside of the matrix, because the actual real machines in real life are trying to hunt down the actual human beings. So, how does this apply? So we'll get into that now. I'm going to start with Ephesians 6:12, because this is it's quite close. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So you've got what's really going on, the bigger picture, which is the spiritual warfare and the truth of God's power in the world. And you also have the truth of the evil forces that are going on in the world. And to a secular society, we don't see any of that. Or we don't, you don't understand that. The secular world rejects the spiritual world in many ways. We as Christians do not. And so we're seeing the bigger picture, and we're seeing that there is a battle happening in the real world. And so one thing we need to think about is, how do we approach the real world? And so I've got some verses here, and the first one I want to start with is 1 Peter 2, verses 11 and 12. So if you'll turn to 1 Peter 2. It says, "Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, on account of you, of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation." So he says, "I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners." So, have you ever felt like a foreigner? I've traveled a variety of places, and it's a very different feeling when you're uncomfortable in the place you are. A little bit humorously, I also felt uncomfortable when I moved to Arkansas to go to college. In that people would say hello to me just as they were walking by. And of course, being from the north, I thought, I don't know this person. Why are they talking to me? And that made me uncomfortable for like a year, probably, before I got used to it. It's a very nice thing. They're very friendly. But something that small can make you feel like a stranger or like an outsider. And never mind going to a foreign country or living in a foreign country or things of that nature. So in this section, he's saying that Christians are like temporary residents and foreigners. And so I think that's an important idea, that we realize that this isn't really what we experience day to day is not something that we should relate to on any deep level, that we should incorporate ourselves into. In Matthew 10:16, Jesus is sending the apostles out into the world to heal and to teach and such. And Matthew 10:16, Jesus says to them, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. This is another very strongly worded verse about our approach to the world, how we interact with the world. And he's talking specifically to the disciples, the 12 apostles in this case. But I think we can get a message out of it. As sheep among wolves. So basically, it's not going to go well for you. There's going to be hard times. And he says, and therefore, because it's going to be tough, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. And shrewd, that means smart, wise, prepared, studied, understand what's happening even if you don't agree with it. So shrewd as snakes, and then innocent as doves. Even though there's stuff going on all around you that you know is wrong and you're aware of it, don't participate in it. It's a pretty strong message. So already we have several ways that we should approach life. As temporary residents and foreigners, as sheep among wolves, as shrewd, being shrewd as serpents, and innocent as doves. And if at this point you're thinking, well, it's looking pretty bleak at this point, things are going to be bad, we should also have courage and trust in God. He is the one in control. So let me reference verse 1 John chapter 4, verses 4. It says, you, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. And that's really something that can give us a lot of confidence. And the one who is in us is the one who is greater than in the world, the one who is in the world. So how else should we approach life? How else should we interact with the world? In this, I would like to start with James chapter 1, verses 27. That's James 1, verses 27. This is pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father, to visit orphans and widows in their distress and keep oneself unstained by the world. It's pretty concise, isn't it? It talks about, one, not being polluted by the world, not being corrupted by it, but also that our behavior and our interaction with those who are suffering is as Christians. So I'll read it again. This is pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. I visited an orphanage in Ukraine on 2 separate occasions, and it was really intense. I was there in March, and it was probably like high 20s temperature. And it's a cement building, and we walked in, and it's like single pane glass, and like no weather stripping around the doors. And you walk in, and it's not any warmer in the building than it was outside. And there's cement rooms and bunk beds in the cement rooms, and there's bare mattresses. And some of the kids have winter coats on inside the building, and some just have sweatshirts. And this was run by the government. And as soon as we walked in, the children ran to our guide who had been there many, many times, and she had one or two under each arm, and at least one on each hand, and they stayed with her the whole time. And within minutes, most of us had a child holding on to us. And just the absolute need of those places, and how much to me it was obvious that love was so much more necessary than food or even clothing. I mean, the kids were not great, but they were doing okay, but what they really needed was someone to care about. And I think this verse in James really illustrates that. To get back to the idea of not being corrupted by the world, I want to go to 2 Peter 1, verse 4. 2 Peter 1, verse 4. For by these he has granted to us his precious and magnificent promises, in order that by them you might become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world by lust. So, in order to be in the world, we have to engage with it and yet still remain pure and not get corrupted by it. And that is one of the major points of how we're to be involved with the world that we're in. I'd like to move on to 1 John chapter 2:15. And this one I think is maybe somewhat more complicated. And it's based off of the idea of not loving the world. And this gets complicated because God created the world, and there are many things that we find appealing about it, and enjoyable about it, and amazing about it. And yet, as it's illustrated here, we need to maintain some sort of detachment from becoming too enthralled with what the world is and what it has to offer. 1 John chapter 2:15. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. That's pretty strong. And then John, I'll just read this quick. John 15:18. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. That's pretty strong language as well. And it also gets to the point, kind of brought on by these earlier points, that if we're doing what we should as Christians, we're on our own program. And if we're on our own program, there are plenty of people in the world who are not going to like either what we're doing or what we're saying or the ideas that what we have, and it's gonna create friction. Dave made a good point this morning in Bible study about our comfort levels, and if we're too comfortable in the world, maybe we're not trying hard enough. So, one bigger picture question that has been in the realm of Christianity since the beginning is, if we're supposed to be pure, if we're supposed to not get corrupted by the world, should we engage in the world? What should we do? Wouldn't it make more sense to just pull out of the world completely and hide? And that's not really what the message is, as far as I can tell. In John chapter 17, verses 15, if you'll turn that, this is when Jesus is praying to God, and he's talking again about his disciples. John 17, verse 15. And this is not long before Jesus is crucified. And so he's praying about the time to come and what's going to happen to the apostles. So John chapter 17, verses 15. I'm going to start 13. But now I come to thee, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy made full in themselves. I have given them thy word, and thy world has hated them, because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. I did not ask thee to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Thy word is truth. So here, Jesus is not giving them the easy way out. He's not asking God to take them out of the world. He's saying they have to stay in it. They have to stay and do their work. But he also says, keep them from the evil one. Verse 15. I did not ask thee to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. And this is where the discomfort comes in. This is where the feeling like a stranger or someone who doesn't belong comes in. And where every day it feels like a little bit of a battle. You need to be prepared, like there's no break, and that things are difficult. But there's someone who's overcome the world, and we know that already. And we know that we need to be prepared for what we do day to day. So I'd like to conclude by going back to Ephesians chapter 6. I'm going to start in verse 10 of Ephesians chapter 6. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God, that you may be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against powers, against the world forces of darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God, that you may be able to resist in the evil day, having done everything to stand firm. Stand firm, therefore, having girded the loins with truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the In addition to all, taking up the shield of faith, with which you will be able to extinguish all the flaming missiles of the evil one. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. With all prayer and petition, pray at all times in the Spirit, and with this in view, be on the alert with all perseverance and petition for all the saints. For us, God has overcome the world, and we can be strangers in the world and stand up and face the world, and whatever happens, we know that we're on the side of God. And if we're on the side of God, then whatever happens to us in this world is not the full story. If you would like to join the side of God, we had the opportunity this morning. If you'd like to be baptized,